Welcome to the Midnightology Podcast, a place where we discuss macabre history, chilling bestiary, horrifying urban legends, visitors from outside our realm, and disturbing things that should only be mentioned during the midnight hours. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for our show. We have a special treat tonight to have with us Kristen Albew, who is the author of the Happy Undead Friends children books.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. She's a Silverton native and our hometown, our adopted hometown.
Yeah, quite a socialite.
Well, I actually moved here in 2005 after living in Texas for a year, and moved here actually December 5th of 2005 because we scheduled our road trip to show up in town on the night of the tree lighting in town, which is a huge event in the area. So I've lived here now since 2005. And
so you showed up like on the night of the tree lighting?
On the night of the tree lighting. We drove from Texas all the way up to Maine and then went down to cross over on Route 66 and ended up arriving in Silverton on December 5th, specifically for the tree lighting. Wow. And that was back when they had the tree downtown in like a pothole, but then it kept falling over. So now we have a live tree in our city park.
In a pothole? Is that where the oak tree was on Oak Street, or just some random pothole?
They actually moved the location of the tree from where the oak one to the other side, but there was one year that a windstorm knocked it down and it took out power for half of the downtown area.
Oh, wow.
And there was another time that it took it out for another half, and at that point they decided to do the permanent tree, which is great because now it's in City Square Park, which is where our farmers market is and everything like that.
Yeah, and everyone can get around it as opposed to, yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about the Happy Undead Friends. How did that all happen, and what are those books about?
They started back in about 10 years ago because one of my dear friends got pregnant, and her husband shares the love of horror movies and, horrible, awful monsters and all this stuff. And I wanted to do some artwork for their baby's nursery. But I did not want to traumatize him, and I wanted my friend to actually let me hang it in his room.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went ahead and just did a painting that had these sort of happy sort of looking monsters, and there was a zombie and a vampire and everybody's smiling. And so that ended up in his bedroom, and people kept seeing it and saying, "Oh, what is that? What is that? What are you doing with that? Is that for a book?" And I was like, I hadn't really thought about it, but decided to write a book based on these characters, and ended up doing it as a graphic novel style.
Sure.
And I based the entire thing. Ziegfeld the zombie is the main character, and I based him off of my little brother who was born with Down syndrome and autism, and he developed brittle diabetes when he was 1 year old.
Oh, wow.
So he had a lot of medical stuff going on. And I loved the idea of a zombie, AKA an innocent, if you don't include the brain eating part. So we're just, in kid book, we skip past that part. But the idea that he tries to make friends, but they chase him off, and there's a little picture with pitchforks as he's being chased out to the desert. So he spends his days, watching the sunrise and the sunset and everything. And he runs into a ghost who's like, "Oh, hey, you should come back to me to Silverville, which is a little town where all of the misfit monsters of the world go." And so they travel all across, and get into these beautiful wooded areas from the desert and come across this little town, and brings her to the local juice shop, which is owned by a vegetarian vampire. Ha 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 ha. And so, I wanted I almost had some inspiration from the idea of Warner Brothers or The Simpsons, where it was for children, but it would be entertaining to adults. And I also wanted it to function on a lot of developmental levels because with a brother who had Down syndrome and autism, visually the books are very, very bright. I call it bubblegum gothic. I do all the line work by hand, and then I color it in on the computer and do all the graphic setup and everything. So woohoo, I'm using my...
And you do it all by yourself, don't you? Yeah.
Sometimes my bachelor degree comes in handy.
Sometimes.
That's amazing. So the love of horror that you have actually kind of fed into that a lot.
Absolutely. There was a point at when I was a kid that a little boy came up to me at the beach, and he's like, "Did you know your brother's a monster?" And I'm like, "No, he's not. He's special." But that always sort of resonated with me because this idea that, especially after reading Frankenstein in sixth grade or whatever, was completely age inappropriate to be reading that sort of stuff.
Oh yeah.
And seeing the idea that the monster is not always the bad guy, and sometimes the hero is actually the monster, and how all these things can work together. So the idea of presenting the main characters as the odd ones, as the people who have been rejected from society on whatever level for whatever reason. And then suddenly you're able to have this character who doesn't understand the world, and different things are introduced. So the first one is about finding home and friends. The second book is about choosing animals, making a good choice in choosing a pet.
Sure.
The third book is about what is a family and what makes up a family and what's important in a family. And then the fourth book, which I've been working on for a while, is about gardening. And I've actually just started the fifth book, which is about bullying. Which was a topic suggested to me by my friend Brittany, because her daughter was like one of my first fans, and it just like warms my heart to this day. She posted a picture of her daughter reading one of my books on the way to school.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, that's great. And her daughter suggested bullying because it's something that she's had to deal with. And using the sort of horror element in there sort of takes it out of this like everything's dandy, because what I try to do in my books on anything that has a serious topic is, rather than give an answer of what you're supposed to do in these situations, I want to start a conversation about it.
Sure.
So the one about bullying, he gets pushed over and he doesn't know why, and so he talks to his friends and they talk about, oh, I was bullied in this way, I was bullied in this way, and then one of them says, well, I was a bully. And everyone's like, what? And so it's bringing in empathy and all that sort of stuff. And when you go with the ultimate outsider, which is, the monster, the freak, then it has a different sort of connotation that's not judgmental. It's just opening up the conversation.
So again, if you haven't said already, what exactly sparked your love of, ghosts, goblins, ghouls, that kind of stuff?
I have been a horror fan from kindergarten that I swear was Cthulhu, and I did not know anything about Lovecraft or anything. I think what really started it for me was the fact that within the horror genre, within all of the stories, you're looking at actual heroes.
Sure.
You're looking at people who are presented with the most horrific situations, and that is what really tests humanity and relationships. And that's partially, and also just because they're fun and they're entertaining. And though it is there's an overall blanket of, this is horror, within that, you're looking at all of these sort of subsections, and as time goes on, it's fracturing more and more as to what is acceptable as a horror movie.
Sure.
And I go back to Blair Witch Project, and this is one of those that, your generation, being millennial, there has always been the shaky camera thing.
Yeah.
To people at the time, there were people throwing up in the aisles because just like their brain was unable to process a shaky camera.
Yeah.
And that's something that horror really brings to cinema, because it can be experimental. You can't do a rom-com that's suddenly like Alice in Wonderland or whatever, because people would be confused and it doesn't follow the formula and everything. But within horror, because it's basically taking the worst case scenario you can come up with And if they have good writers and, all that sort of stuff, making it 10 times worse, and then having people, fight and prove their humanity and prove their strength and all of that sort of stuff. And they're fun.
Yeah. And in reality, I mean, do you consider yourself a believer of like, paranormal things such as like, not necessarily like like a biblical afterlife, but as far as like, do you believe that people linger on if they have like unfinished business, or what's your kind of view on that?
It's kind of funny because when we were first talking about the possibility of my coming on, I was thinking back to, well, where did my belief in, because I enjoyed horror much before I started really thinking about the concepts behind it.
Yeah.
And I was reading ghost books and everything, but I actually had a substitute math teacher in 6th grade, I believe, come in, and we had this conversation about parallel lines, and that there's one school of thought within mathematician world that the whole point of a parallel line is that they never touch. But then there's another school of thought that says, well, you can't draw them forever, so you cannot prove that they don't touch, so therefore they might. And so it was just this sort of like weird esoteric conversation. And I had horrible insomnia. And I'll remind you, this was like 6th or 7th grade. I was a bizarre child. But I had complete insomnia. And I actually wrote out my theoretical construct of how life and death and, and the paradigm shift of it. And basically, I came up with the idea that reality is a space under a chair.
Sure.
That it is that which is that which is defined by our experience is what it is because we call it that. And so within the paranormal range, I've had enough experiences and I've had enough moments where things have happened in such a way that there is something out there.
Was there something that sparked it for you? Like, did you have an experience that really shot it into reality for you? Or is it more just like actually thinking about it and coming to terms that there's actually probably something out there?
The only times that I can legitimately say that I had experiences that I know something happened, because I've had lots of like deja vu and like different experiences, but that I wouldn't necessarily define those as paranormal. The 2 that I had were when I was younger, and they both happened in the same room, and they were quite specific. One, I was laying on a bed, and I was like waking up, and it wasn't one of those like, oh, I'm still like half asleep things.
Yeah.
I was like laying in bed, and my sister was already up and gone and everything, and I felt somebody take a breath and puff on my chest. But the thing is, I was laying on my stomach.
Huh.
And it was that moment and it was so distinct. Like I heard it, I felt the intake of breath, I felt the puff come out, and I heard the and I just sat there for a moment, and it was just one of those sort of weird, like, okay, I'll just process that and file that away as, whatever. And those are a lot of the experiences I believe that people have that they shuttle away. But that one was brought up to me again because I was in the same bedroom, and this was years later, at my grandmother's house. And my grandmother's house was always where everybody was over, and we'd have the family events and everything. So I woke up from a nap, and I heard a bunch of voices. Like it sounded like a party going on out there. And I literally woke up thinking, why are all these people over? Everybody is supposed to be like, I didn't think there was gonna be a bunch of people here. And so as I woke up, it became, instead of less distinct as something, coming out of a dream would be, it became more distinct to the point that I could start like understanding and recognizing voices and everything. And I'm just like, oh, everybody's here. So I like burst out and go into the living room. Nobody's there. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe it was like the vent or something. So I keep looking around the house. I find my grandmother in the backyard. She's like, no, nobody's been here for hours. And I'm like, but I just heard people. And she's like, no, nobody's been inside I've been out here for an hour. And that was the moment that I was like, okay, there's something going on in that room. Like there is definitely something going on in that room. And that was one of the last time I was ever there, because my parents got divorced and we just never went back there. But that was the one space that I would say, if I ever had the opportunity to go like do a an investigation or something, that to me would be the place to go, because that's the place where I could not explain away the experiences.
Yeah.
So, how much of that actually fed into your creative?
I put out. I try to do stuff that I enjoy. You know, it's like if you want to read a book, you got to write it. And if you want to see a movie, you have to make the movie yourself. And so every time I'm inspired to do anything along the lines of the books, or, you know, anything along that, I want to do things that are honest, and I want to do things that are entertaining. And if they're not both, I don't think they're worth doing. Like, you know, the whole idea of faking investigation results or manipulating stuff or whatever. It's like, I just wanted to be honest. I just wanted to be like clear. And that's why, you know, of every place that I could go, like there's some really great places in town in Silverton that have been involved in ghost tours or investigations, that sort of thing. And it'd be fun to do there, but to go back to the one place that I'm like guaranteed like something's going on, that would to me would be really interesting.
So out of all the places in Silverton that you think have some sort of, you know, paranormal aspect to them, which would rate the top of your list?
I would definitely say Max.
Okay. And the history behind Max is it used to be a brothel, essentially. Yes. And you were telling us earlier that the actual bar was the one that was actually used downstairs when it was still an operational brothel upstairs. And I feel like, you know, something with that kind of history might have something still lingering on, and, you know, being used in that, or the rooms upstairs might have something. Now, I heard that on the ghost tour they kind of went into, wasn't there like a murder or something that happened there, or was that just kind of...
There are reports of murders happening there, but they were before the time that Silverton was a town.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's one of those, oh yeah, people got shot all the time, but whether they lived or whether they died, or, you know, that sort of thing. I wouldn't be surprised, as quite often the brothels in older towns like this were the place where most of the drinking happened and where most of the fighting happened and everything. So I would not be surprised if that was the case. But from what I understand, the people that I've talked to that have had experiences there, the ones that they've had have been much milder. Like nobody's ever had anything thrown at them or anything, as far as I know. Most of the people I've talked to say, oh, they'll get this like random smell of perfume and there's nobody else there, and they're like standing next to the fryer. So there's absolutely no reason why that would be there.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. But from what I understand, not much happens downstairs, but I thought they had apartments upstairs, but apparently it's just open. Or
yeah, my understanding it's not really completed upstairs. I mean, and you know, it's funny how a lot of the older towns in the United States, especially when they have that kind of frontier, I don't know, say element, or you know, the idea that they're a frontier town.
Yeah, well, this was a logging town.
Right.
I mean, that was the thing.
And my understanding is that Oak Street, actually, there's a placard that's inset in the middle of the street, and there was a big oak there.
Yes.
And before there was even a thought of a town, that that was a rendezvous point where you had the mountain men and the Indians, and they would gather at that oak because it was a common landmark. So they would know, hey, we'll meet there in the spring at the oak and do our trade.
The old oak tree.
Yeah. Yep. So in fact, they have that stump. The stump, when they pull it out of the street, which you used to have to drive around, is now behind the Silverton Historical Society building.
Yes.
So, you know, you've got a lot of good history here for the paranormal.
Absolutely. And the fact that a river runs right through downtown. And not only was that literally we are at a crossroads. We are where all of these, like the Portland to, you know, different areas and the major roads went through, and the fact that we have a river running through it as well. I mean, it's a very energetic zone. It has a very, very strong energy in here. And most of the places within Silverton that I've heard of that are the most haunted are either right on the river or within a block or two of the river, which probably has a lot to do with, the energy of a space. Like, that's why, and the convenience of a place, and the way that the hills, cause the little dirt wagon roads to go. This was a central spot, which is interesting because it's not where they actually built the original town. The original town was much closer up to, like, it was possibly technically inside of the area of Silver Falls,
Sure.
but they moved it down because it wasn't convenient for mill work there, because everything was still rocky.
Yeah.
And so they moved it down here where the Fisher Mill was right there on the river and everything. And so, yeah, this was a rough area, and I'm sure there was a lot of fairly rough activity going on throughout.
Well, and you also mentioned, I mean, because there's the energy that's here in Silverton. Mm-hmm. You also have another project that you worked on, a film project. Uh-huh. So how did that all take place? And did the Silverton energy kind of flow into that filmmaking?
Oh, absolutely. I was unemployed one summer with 3 of my friends, and we decided we wanted to write a zombie movie that both paid homage, mocked, and broke every zombie rule. And so we spent an entire summer coming up with every cliche, the version we could put in, everything like that. And we came up with the scenario. Then I wrote the script, and then I ended up actually going back to school up at Clackamas for film studies, to be an extension on my graphic design degree for a full marketing degree, which is how I stayed on unemployment for another year and got to learn a bunch of amazing stuff that I've got to apply to a lot of different projects since then. But I had this full-length script, and the second term we were supposed to do a short 10-minute movie, and my instructor was like, well, I think you can do this, so go ahead. And I finished about 45 minutes of it. There's still more to go on it, but it was written specifically to happen in Silverton. It was written specifically almost block for block for where things were. I had an apartment downtown. Like, my character's name was Noelle, which is my middle name. There was a character named Thea, who's another friend, who's, half the people had their actual names on it.
Yeah.
But because I was able to go to school for it, I got sweet equipment, PAs, this whole support staff, and, more actors and everything. And so we spent 7 days total over a month and a half shooting all of the footage. And the most fun part about it for me within the whole structure was having zombies walk around downtown and having the cop show up and being like, so what's going on here? And like, oh, we're shooting a movie. He's like, okay, cool. And he just drives away. It's like, do we have permits? No, this was so guerrilla. I actually, if I include my tuition for that semester, the movie cost $2,300 to make. And most of that was food, just feeding everybody.
Some days, some movies are filmed on iPhones.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's all about, what you can put into it and what you can get back out of it.
Absolutely. And the digital revolution for both audio, podcasting, for video, for all of that has just revolutionized, because you're no longer looking at $100 a foot for film. You're looking at 7 hours for nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So having that in mind, what do you think the possibility that it's so much easier for people to manipulate either something that's already filmed, or actually create from scratch a digital paranormal incident, I guess, and then put it on YouTube, selling it as something that's really paranormal, but it's not.
Yeah, and that goes back to the whole thing of honesty. Like, I play trivia every Tuesday, and they're always like, don't use your cell phones. We want to know how much you know, not in Google. It's like, well, yeah, because if we won $25 and cheated, like, no. So, everyone can, take a video of a glow stick going in the air and then superimpose something and be like, hey, I saw an alien. It's gotten to the point where you can take a video and slap somebody else's face on it and make them say whatever. So we've gotten to that Orwellian stage of don't believe your eyes and ears. But at the same time, we also have gotten to the point where people who are doing legitimate research into these sort of situations are getting the same kind of evidence that's manipulated in movies or manipulated by people who are trying to do fake versions of things. And so being able to distinguish between the two has almost become impossible. So a lot of it at this point has to do with sourcing, like where are you getting in this information from? How was it changed? What happened with it?
I guess what I'll ask you is that if you're looking at the paranormal now, I mean, if we take it as an example, because like I said, I'm an old guy.
Mm-hmm.
I remember, watching The Exorcist, and from my mind, I think the reason The Exorcist was such a popular movie is because people, first of all, I mean, dealing with demons and all of those things were something that people knew was being done in the Catholic Church. But
yes.
I think that people thought, oh, I could see that happening, and it's scary.
Oh yeah, it's bringing that element of things that aren't supposed to happen. That's why most horror movies happen in a house or at camp or in these places that we're supposed to feel safe. And it's also the reason that 9 times out of 10, I mean, it's less true now, but if you look back, 9 times out of 10, a woman will be running through the woods scantily clad. Because that is one of those things, just that primal fear of like, you don't even have shoes on and it's dark and all of that. So within that being the sort of genre purpose to make you uncomfortable, to make you fearful, the whole point of it is emotional manipulation, and that is the whole point of a successful horror movie. It's for you to look at a flat object, have random sound pumped into your ear, and jump and scream and swear and sweat for no logical purpose other than the fact that you're drawn into this story. And then the best ones, like you were saying, are the ones that you could be like, oh, this could happen. There's certain movies that it's just sort of like, okay, well, that's interesting. And oh, yeah, there's big aliens and stuff. But then you look at something like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and you have something that's like this silent, creeping threat that nobody's listening to.
Yeah.
And then you get to that ultimate moment at the end where she's like, oh, you made it too. And he's like, and that's the point at which it's like when people are turning on you, when houses are turning on you with, things within houses, or even when it goes all the way to a monster or a ghost or something that is beyond, that is supernatural or beyond the normal or whatever. And I think that's what elevates it into a horror movie.
So do you think that's part of what's happened that's made us so jaded and why we almost expect to have to see something spectacular in order for us to believe it? Because it's, I mean, as almost like a trope, because you have like shadow people. I mean, that's a thing.
Yes.
I mean, people see shadow beings.
Well, and that's something that's widely like, you hear about it all the time. Like,
right.
That's something that it's like, okay, well, I've seen that on YouTube. It's obviously fake.
Right. But I mean, what I'm saying is that you have an actual paranormal experience that people do have become part of, I mean, that it's an experience for them. It's a reality for them. They've experienced a shadow person, but yet Hollywood takes an element like that and makes a movie. So you have what was it? Paranormal
Activity.
Yeah.
or, go clear back to Barbara Hershey and The Entity, which is based on a true story. And Hollywood fictionalizes it. And so I think it's kind of what people almost expect. And maybe that's why YouTube has become such a huge, there's top 5 shows everywhere on YouTube about paranormal stuff. So go ahead and tell us how you think Hollywood kind of feeds into how people might frame a paranormal experience. Or do you think Hollywood is framing it at all?
I believe that Hollywood is quite often a reflection, although a distorted reflection of reality. So we're looking at all these movies that are like based on real events or anything like that. What they do is they take common elements of stories. And my belief within the manifestation of ghosts within our reality is that when they are able to focus their energy enough, by sapping out of a person or out of an electronic device, just based on the physics, they will manifest in a certain way. Just like if you throw a pebble into a pond, you're never going to get square ripples. So there's basic physics involved because they're coming out of their paradigm into our paradigm, so they have to function on our level. So you're looking at the shadow people or the white noise phenomenon or those sorts of things. Well, and then Hollywood will take those elements and put them into movies, and then they become part of the lexicon of what we're discussing when things happen. Like white noise was a thing within certain circles, but then they made a movie about it, and then everybody is getting white noise on their cell phones. And, the idea that once it's planted in people's heads, more people are going to experience something. And that kind of goes back to the same idea of the, what can you believe, the videos on YouTube and everything. Well, what can you believe of your own experience when, you are trained to believe that certain things happen in a certain way? Like the idea of, with aliens. Once people started talking about aliens, and suddenly a lot of people were talking about aliens. And one of the phenomenons that they talk about is sleep paralysis, when you're coming out of sleep and your brain wakes up before your body does, because your brain shuts down your body functions so you don't kill yourself in your sleep acting everything out. And so this concept that you are coming out of your dream, you're unable to move, your body goes into panic mode, your dreams bounce around, and you can't quite focus, and then you see somebody standing in the window, and you're convinced that they're holding you back and everything like that. Well, that's another thing that suddenly people are aware that it happened, and so you look back onto all these reports of being abducted, and they say, oh, I was in bed and I couldn't move, and and da-da-da. And so there's a repetition of activity, but it's partially because that's how stuff's going to happen, and partially because it's become part of the encyclopedia of, oh, if I see a ghost, it's probably going to happen like this.
Yeah, and another thing is I feel like people are more prone to want to believe that something has happened or something, has possibly happened. Like for me, when I hear something off in the distance, or I think I'm alone, but there's someone just downstairs or something like that, I kind of want to write that off as oh, you know what, that was a paranormal thing for me. But I think that's just my brain telling me it's you want something to be there, you want to believe that. And I feel like people are trained more nowadays to believe that there's paranormal stuff going on, because I believe in the 1950s it wasn't like that. People didn't really discuss it, and people weren't trained like that. That's why they normally wrote things off as oh, it was just the wind, it was just the shutters, it was just this and that, it was just my, brain playing tricks on me with the light, like that kind of stuff. I feel like, again, nowadays people just they want something, they want to believe it.
Well, and the 50s was a backlash against spiritualism, which is very much the same phenomenon that's happening today, but back in the day where people were doing seances and they were doing the plasma where they were pulling silk scarves out of their noses and stuff. And that was another time period where people wanted to dabble and people wanted to believe. So the sketchy cell phone video of today are the seances where the woman's rolling her eyes back and everything and telling, oh, I'm getting an R. Oh, a Robert. Okay, he's happy in the afterlife. can I have $500?
Yeah.
You know, and so this, the want of connection to the afterlife or connection to family, or, you know, the want of that connection to the other side has always been there, but religion has pushed it in certain directions, and counter religions like the spiritualism that was popular in, I think, the 10s and 20s, and
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
that sort of thing. And so it always comes in waves and everything. So I think the thing of the 50s was that they didn't want to have, the outsider was not safe.
Sure.
And so if you actually look back at zombie movies throughout history, it's hilarious, because back in the, originally, they were always like voodoo, like super racist, like movies about that. But then in the 50s, they switched to this teenage automaton falling into line thing. Because of the way the censorship worked, they couldn't really do direct social action pieces in movies at that time. I mean, they couldn't even kiss for more than 2 seconds, for God's sakes. You know, I mean, before the, you know, the rating system, the prohibition on anything PG was insane. And so you saw a huge upsurge in these teen zombie movies that were super Bobby socks, like da 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 da.
Right.
But then there would be, if you'd actually watch it, kind of like listening to 50s music and you realize all of it's about sex, but it's always euphemistic.
Yeah.
That's all zombie movies from the 50s are about. Well, and a lot of them are like anti-communist. It's like, don't give in to, you know, your special individual, and don't, you know. But at the same time, they were like, but you need to be the right kind of not zombie. Yeah, so they had a lot of social implications and everything, but were presented as these Bobby Sox teenage movies.
Until Romero.
Yes.
And then you had the Romero zombies.
Yes, Romero and Evil Dead, and like, yeah, right within that sort of time frame. And then it turned into Brains and Green Mist. And then you get to 48 Days Later, and you have the introduction of fast zombies, which I think in and of itself seemed like a trite introduction, and people were like, oh, fast or slow. But what it did is it sort of broke the genre expectations, which is again why I love horror movies, which I love sci-fi movies, because they take what's expected and say no, and then they go off in another direction. And so, but 48 Weeks Later was awful. Bleh. But you have these developments of how they are representing something else by using a monster. You know, and it'll go through phases, because, you know, zombies right now are popular because of Walking Dead. You go back to the 90s and it was vampires and, you know, all of that sort of stuff.
Right.
And there's some overlap and, you know, generalization and all that sort of thing. But 9 times out of 10, they will be the same sort of social sub-stories, but sticking in a different monster as to whatever is popular at the time.
Okay, so let's take Kristen
Uh-huh.
and put Kristen in a haunted house.
Okay.
Let's pick a house that we know exists and people say it's haunted, actually, by a demon. The Sally house. I don't know. Have you heard about the Sally house?
Is that the one up in Washington on the coast?
I believe it's in Washington, but the Sally house is haunted by a demon that takes the form of a little girl named Sally.
Okay.
And so let's take Kristen and put Kristen in the Sally house for the sake of argument. And you're experiencing, you know, what I guess you might say the types of paranormal stuff that people talk about, you know, slamming doors, seeing shadow things, hearing voices. Okay. Does Kristen run out of the house scared, or does Kristen, you know, call it out and look for it, and you know, you see the door, you see a figure? Do you go up and inspect?
I don't spook easily. And I also believe that the construct of negative and positive energies within a house can both be misunderstood, misaligned, and manipulated. So, they talk, there's a lot of stories where demons will present themselves as little kids to get, attention. I don't necessarily disbelieve in demons, but I think it's much more likely on sort of an energetic level that they were angry, sad, violent, gross people who suddenly were unbound by bodies. And because for whatever reason, they're lingering and they want to do bad stuff. I think that poltergeists are actually residual PK energy that people put too much energy into, and there's an energy bubble, and then it becomes a haunting in a house. But then you have the kind spirit, all these different things.
So you're not necessarily frightened of the activity.
I would be more curious to sort of interact. I guarantee you I would scream and giggle, be scared, and I wouldn't try to be all stoic and everything. And, because I like going to haunted houses, and the fact that it was a real situation it really just piqued my curiosity, because every time I've been in a situation that, something could be wrong, or so, I always move into it to a certain point. Though I don't put myself in danger. Like, I was dog sitting at a house once in the country, and I had turned the alarm system off because I'm fine. I'm not worried about it. All of a sudden, the alarm beeps, and I'm just like, okay, that's weird. Maybe the battery. It beeps again. I go over there. The freaking thing says, check the back door. I'm like, the hell you say? So I went back and I rattled the door, and then I shut the blinds and went to bed, because I'm just like, the system is off and it's telling me to check the back door. I don't like this conversation. But if I was there with the intent of exploring, and I had other people around, and I wasn't worried about just freaking out and tripping over something, because that would be the most likely injury I would have in that situation. I'd slam my face into a door or something again. I don't think fear would be part of it, because I don't believe that I would walk into that sort of situation with an unprotected person,
right?
Like an unprotected body. Like, I would, whether it would be saying a blessing on myself or saging myself or whatever, I would basically say, I'm open to conversation. I'm not open to your energy.
Well, what I think is fascinating about the example you just gave of your house, your dog sitting adventure, is that it kind of mixes the elements of all three things. You have something that could be paranormal. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going off saying check the back door. You look, you check the back door, and it seems normal.
Oh yeah.
So why is it doing it? So it could be something paranormal. It could be normal. It could be just a fault in the alarm system. Mm-hmm. And then you have that Hollywood trope of, oh my God, the woman alone in the house with the alarm that says check the back door. It's kind of like the old urban legend, of the phone call. Have you checked on the kids?
Exactly. Which is why that's already worked its way into another one of my scripts at this point, because come on. But the fact that my reaction was humored, yeah, fuck that, was just, it was funny, because it was I was scared on a certain level of, I'm alone, and I wasn't even dog sitting. I was freaking cat sitting for two cats that never came out from underneath the couch. So it's I had no protection. And so, again, it literally brought all those different elements together. But even in that situation, I wasn't oh my God, la, la, la. But I closed the drapes. I'm not scared, but I ain't stupid either.
Right. Well, I mean, as an example, I'm, in Bigfoot, as an example, I classify myself as not one of those people that says, I believe absolutely, right? Yes. I am open to it because I believe there's the possibility that Bigfoot exists, and I think it's actually probable. I mean, I've experienced personally, I've seen tracks.
Yeah.
That I can't explain, that to me, they look like Bigfoot tracks. Mm-hmm. And I've had those feelings where I feel like I'm being watched by something intelligent. And I've been stalked by cougar out hunting. I've had them follow me in my tracks, and I know what that feels like. It's a little different, but you can tell you're being watched.
Yeah,
So
there's predator and prey, and
right,
something
it's
that's
it's
curious
the hair on the back of your neck stands
Mhm.
up, but it's a different feeling than what I felt before when I think that maybe a Bigfoot was watching me.
Yes.
As far as Bigfoot goes, I mean, it's again, we're talking about when I go out in the woods, I carry a gun, I go prepared, but fuck that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and I guess I'm at the same place in a lot of this because I am a classic skeptic. Like, I want information. I'm voracious for information, and I watch documentary after documentary. And there's nothing I disbelieve in, because I honestly, on every level, believe that anything is possible. But I don't necessarily think that all things that are presented in a certain way are what they are. Like, a lot of people can say, oh, I saw this and I felt this. And so much of the like investigations for different things are always like, oh yeah, I got the hairs on the back of my neck, or oh, something felt like it just brushed against me. And so much of an experience, I mean, everything about it is about an experience.
Yeah, a personal experience.
The 5 or 6 senses, however many you acknowledge, you're feeling stuff, you're hearing stuff, and everything. And yeah, we now have all these things that might get it on recorder. We have video, but in the millions and millions and millions of hours on video, on just online, I mean, there's millions of hours of video. There is not a single little gray person walking up and saying, take me to your leader.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's where the skepticism comes in. But people tell me stories, and I'm like, I am absolutely sure that happened to you in your experience.
Yeah, I believe you that you believe that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, I think that the bottom line is that we all, as we go about talking about the paranormal or our experiences with the paranormal, we all have to just say, okay, it's my personal experience. Even if I have a K2 meter or an EMF meter with me and I'm reading energies, I can only, relate the story to you, and you'll either accept it for what it is or you won't.
Absolutely. And that's the biggest thing within, the truth is out there. It's like, well, yeah, the truth is out there. Are we ever going to find it? I don't know. But it's fun to explore, and it's fun to hear other people's experiences. And it's fun to go to locations and try to figure out what's going on there, which is why we've gotten to a point where, exploring is entertainment. And that's...
Well, for me personally, I mean, and part of the reason I'm doing this podcast personally is because for me, it's more about the trip than the destination.
Yeah.
I'm really just wanting to just experience the stuff along the way. And that's the joy I get out of it, rather than saying, I'm going to prove ghosts exist, or Bigfoot exists, or aliens exist. I'm just going to experience it for myself.
Well, especially because when you're working back from a conclusion, you're going to be able to find the evidence, rather than going forward in a journey where you're taking evidence and that'll point you in a different direction for research.
Yeah.
If you work back from a conclusion, I mean, statistically speaking, you can prove anything if you find the right statistics. I worked with a friend on a paper in college that was, you had to choose an absurd thought and then prove it statistically. And the idea of it was that the only way to find happiness is to commit suicide. And we found 3 different studies that, piecing together the information, would prove that conclusion. Because one was basically like, most people who try to commit suicide want to be able to die. And, it was just like these completely random studies that had nothing to do with each other. So when, if you're working back from a conclusion, you'll find your answer. But if you explore, all you're going to find are more questions. And I think that's much more fun.
Right.
Yeah. And wrapping up, I feel like that's kind of the main goal of this podcast.
Yeah. So what I want to make sure we do is, first of all, we'd love to have you back on in the future.
Oh, I'd love it.
So So the folks out in the audience can know where to purchase your books. Why don't you tell us a little bit about where they can get your books?
All right. The Happy Undead Friends book series is available on Amazon. My pen name is Auntie Kiki, so you can go ahead and find that on there. You can also find us on the Facebook, where I try to keep updated on occasion, although the summer sun has kept me in the garden a lot. But it's the facebook.com/Happy Undead, and they can follow the book stuff there.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming. And you almost sounded a little old like me when you said the Facebook, but so we'd love to have you back. And thanks so much, Kristen, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so happy you guys are here asking questions because it's great.
All right.
Thank you.
You folks, have a good night. And as always, stay creepy.